So, when I was in, I don't know, I guess I was in college, I read this tiny little book by a fellow named Noah Ben Shea. And it's truly one of my favorite books. It's a little tiny book, and I read it maybe in 90 minutes or so. And every few years I read it again, because it's something that moves me. You see, there's this baker who also is deep down really a teacher. And he would be baking his bread and thinking of these ideas and thinking of these lessons, and he'd write them down on little slips of paper. And there was one day when one of these slips ended up in the bread by accident. And somebody opened it up and thought it was such a wise teaching. Jacob the baker would start writing all of these thoughts and reflections and lessons and teachings on these little pieces of paper, put them in bread, and everybody in this town was buying them. Well, one day, two children who had become dependent on Jacob for Jacob's guidance were concerned about what they would do as he got older and would one day die. Jacob, sensing this, drew these children near, and he told them a story. And he says, once there was a student who was with a teacher for many, many years. And when the teacher felt like he was going to die, he wanted to make even his death a lesson. And that night, the teacher took a torch, called his student, and set off with her throughout the forest. And soon they reached the middle of the woods where the teacher extinguished the torch and didn't say a word, didn't share any explanation. And the student was a little worried. What's the matter, Jacob? The torch has gone out, said Jacob, and continued to walk on. But the student was getting agitated. But will you leave me here in the dark? And Jacob said, no, I will never leave you in the dark. I will leave you searching for the light. I often think of that story. A teacher blowing out the torch. But there's always going to be a light, even if it's not lit. It's up to us to search for it. The light, a truth, values, ethics, kindness, humanity, all of these things that we get to search for, because life is precious. Life is so delicate. Life isn't always easy, but it's good. And it ought to be meaningful. In the Torah portion, we get to meet this woman named Sarah. And we see that the Torah names the Torah portion for her, Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah. And the very first thing we learn about the life of Sarah is that she dies. At 127 years old, I don't think I want to go that long. But that's just me. How sad it must have been for Abraham, her husband, who after all of those years together, journeyed together, built a community together, had all of this life and vision, and built a future together, that she would be lost. In our world, there's some major figures in the world that could be like Sarah. I don't know who you would think of. I could think of Coretta Scott King, Mother Teresa maybe, Golda Meir, Princess Diana. There's all of these powerful, influential women who make their mark along the way, and Sarah is among them. And it's interesting that in this Torah portion we see her presence only in this first few verses, and it largely focuses on another generation of women, starting with Rebekah. See, Abraham and Sarah together have a son, Isaac. And at the end of Abraham's life, going out into this Torah portion, we see that he's looking for a wife for Isaac. And his servant discovers Rebekah, Rivka. So we see that Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah, even though it marks her death, and immediately meeting Rebekah, there's something powerful about Sarah's presence. It doesn't go away. It stays. It's with them. And a new generation gets to lead this ancient Hebrew tribe of ours, eventually becoming the Jewish people. There's a very famous teaching, according to a midrash, which are the rabbinic writers who are trying to fill in gaps and help us to understand the things that the Torah doesn't explain. It says that Rabbi Abba said, "Do we not know that the sun rises and the sun sets?" And what he's talking about is, just before Sarah dies, we learn about in this strange passing phrase about the birth of Rebekah, but we don't know anything about her. It's just spoken in passing. But we see the birth of Rebekah from last week's Torah reading, and now we see the death of Sarah. And Rabbi Abba says, do we then not know that the sun rises and the sun sets? The meaning is that before the Holy One of Blessing, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, causes the sun or the light of one righteous person to set, God causes another tzaddik, another righteous person to rise. Before God allowed Sarah's sun to set, God caused that of Rebekah's to rise. I think there's some truth in that for us. It's not just about Sarah and Rebekah. I've been thinking, for lots of reasons, I've been thinking a lot about ancestors recently. My parents have been gone for years and years. So have all of my grandparents. There's nobody in this world who has called me son for 20 years. And recently, maybe entering my 50s, maybe it's, life happens. I'm starting to think about these ancestors of mine just a little bit differently. Their presence, their legacy, the strength I got, but not just them, not just the grandparents I've known from childhood at least, but who are all of these people and what did they go through in order to get me to the United States? Who are these people and what did they have to do in order to get me and my children? Well, they had nothing to do with getting to Colorado, I guess, but that's all on me. And my wife. Yeah, thank you. But where did these ancestors travel? What did they do? How did they keep their Judaism alive? Every generation, even until today, the grandparents, the parents, the teachers, the rabbis, the teachers, the friends, all of these people have worked to help us realize how wonderful it can be to be part of faith and Jewish life, Jewish community, even to be a Jew. Rabbi Brad Artson of California once asked, for all of this, how can we ever repay them? How can we share and show our appreciation for being the heirs to this rich legacy? And the legacy isn't survival. Let's not make it so simplistic. I think it was about Sarah and Rebekah. I think Rebecca was a special person, someone with a kind and pure heart. And there was a messenger who wanted to find a daughter for Isaac. And that servant, Eliezer, asked God for guidance. What should be the criteria? And Eliezer figured out who the right woman was in Rebecca. She was kind and generous and didn't look the other way when somebody else was feeling vulnerable and hot and tired, brought water to Eliezer the servant and to all of these animals. She was compassionate. She was a real human being. I believe that we can follow in Sarah and Rebecca's footsteps. I think we're fortunate that there are many who can help us learn the ways to be just and caring and generous. And I think that our tradition has a lot to offer. And from those from other traditions who are here, yours too has so much to offer. And I think that is a gift that we can receive if we're willing to let it in. So to conclude with Rabbi Artson, he teaches the key component for transmitting the love of Yiddishkeit, of that Jewish essence and Torah is one Jew willing to lavish some time and caring and wisdom onto another seeking soul. I think we can do that. I hope and pray we can do that. Let's be a part of that kind of an open tent. Aleinu l'shabeach. The bottom, the